Has anyone ever encountered this kind of situation? Your computer suddenly becomes as slow as a snail. Your browser is full of all kinds of messy pop-up ads. And one morning when you boot up, all your important files are locked and a line appears on the screen saying, "Pay a ransom to decrypt." This is not a science fiction movie, but real computer viruses. Today, we'll take a deep look. Why do computers get viruses? How exactly do they invade? And how do operating systems defend themselves? In 1986, in Pakistan, the brothers Badr Farooq and Amjad Farooq, in order to protect the medical software they developed from being pirated, wrote the brain virus. It would modify the computer's boot sector. The two originally intended to force pirates to contact them to buy the legitimate version. But unexpectedly, it achieved the function of being copied to other computers via floppy disks, becoming the world's first spreading virus. In 1999, programmer David Smith wrote the Melissa virus. It disguised itself as a document containing 100 adult website links. Once a user opened it in Word, it automatically invoked Outlook and sent infected emails to the first 50 contacts in the address book. At that time, more than 250,000 corporate mailboxes around the world were infected, and giants such as Microsoft and Intel had to temporarily shut down their mail systems. These reveal the core mechanism of viruses, inserting into or replacing the system's normal execution flow and tricking the system into running the hacker-written code first, instead of the original program instructions. After more than 30 years of development, malware has formed a huge family tree. A virus is the most common malicious program. It quietly modifies executable files on the computer, for example the .exe programs we commonly use, inserting a special jump instruction. When that program runs, the system does not execute the original function directly. Instead, it first jumps to the virus code, allowing the virus to perform its tasks, and only afterwards returns to the original program to continue running. This stealthy modus operandi often makes it hard for users to notice their device has been infected. Meanwhile, when an infected file is copied or transferred to other devices or used to open other files, the virus takes the opportunity to spread, infecting more files and eventually producing a chain reaction. Worms differ from viruses in that they do not need to attach themselves to other files to propagate. They can spread independently, and their propagation speed is often faster. When a computer program runs, it allocates a block of memory called a buffer to store input data. If the program does not check the length of input data, when the data exceeds the buffer's capacity, the data will overflow and overwrite other critical areas in memory. Worms exploit this by crafting data that exceeds the buffer. When this data is injected into the program, the overflowed part writes the worm code into the program's memory stack or heap, hijacking the program's execution flow and causing the program to run the worm's code. The code-red worm in 2001 exploited a buffer overflow vulnerability in Microsoft IS web servers and infected hundreds of thousands of servers worldwide in just 14 hours. The name Trojan comes from the Greek story. It disguises itself as a completely normal-looking program. It might be a downloaded free game, a utility tool, or even a system update installer. But when you run this disguised program, it quietly opens a remote control port in the background, allowing hackers to control the device or secretly scan and steal photos, documents, account passwords, and other private data. Trojans cannot actively invade devices like viruses or worms by exploiting vulnerabilities. They rely entirely on the user's active execution. In other words, as long as we don't randomly download software from unknown sources or open suspicious email attachments, we can fundamentally avoid Trojan attacks. In recent years, ransomware, which is extremely destructive, has become prominent. Its main characteristic is its ability to encrypt files. Its encryption logic uses two kinds of cryptographic algorithms. First, it uses symmetric encryption, AES, to encrypt files, whether photos, documents, or important data, turning them into unreadable gibberish. AES is fast and can encrypt a large number of files in a short time, leaving you little time to react. Then the attacker uses another asymmetric encryption, RSA, algorithm to encrypt the AES key itself. Asymmetric encryption uses a pair of keys, a public key that can be distributed and a private key known only to the attacker. Only with the private key can the encrypted AES key be decrypted. This means that even if you somehow obtain the encrypted AES key without the attacker's RSA private key, you cannot recover your locked files. Finally, spyware. Its core principle is to hook system API. An API can be understood as the system's functional interface, for example, the keyboard input. A PI is responsible for handling the instructions when we press keys. Spyware, by technical means, hooks into these API. When you type account passwords or bank card numbers, the keyboard input API first passes the input to the spyware, and the spyware then forwards the content to the system. So how do these malicious programs sneak into systems without a sound? The most common way is by email. Attackers craft emails that look very legitimate, impersonating bank account notices or even courier pickup reminders. Emails often carry attachments, and those attachments are often documents with macro scripts, that is, VBA code, such as Word or Excel files. Once you open the document, the system may pop up a prompt, enable macros to view full content. If you click to enable, the embedded VBA code springs to life. It can directly call Windows system APIs, And by using the system's own function channels, it quietly connects to the attacker's server and automatically downloads malware onto your computer. The second route is malicious websites. When surfing the web, if you accidentally click a pop-up ad or follow an unknown link to some site, these sites will exploit browser vulnerabilities. For example, the common cross-site scripting XSS vulnerability. Attackers inject malicious code into normal web pages. When you open the page, the browser loads the page content and also executes that malicious code, which can then take control of your browser or even download malware. There's also something called a drive-by-driver download vulnerability, where attackers exploit interactions between the browser and system drivers to bypass system checks and directly install malicious driver software. Drivers have very high system privileges. Once installed successfully, it becomes trivial to plant additional malware afterwards. The most common scenario is downloading so-called free cracked software from unofficial sources. Many of these cracked installers have been tampered with by attackers and secretly contain Trojans. During installation, it looks like you're installing the software you want, but the Trojan runs behind the scenes. Exploiting system vulnerabilities is also a common method. Operating systems and commonly used software inevitably have unpatched vulnerabilities, and attackers focus on those. For example, buffer overflow vulnerabilities mentioned earlier. Attackers input data far beyond what a program can handle, causing data to overflow into critical memory areas, overwrite normal code, and execute their malicious instructions. There are also privilege escalation vulnerabilities. Some bugs let attackers move from ordinary user privileges up to administrator privileges. Administrator rights allow any operation on the system. Once obtained, attackers can freely install malware, change system settings, or even delete important data. The entire system becomes effectively fully open to the attacker. But don't worry too much. Faced with the myriad attack techniques of malware, common operating systems like Windows, macOS, and Linux already have a built-in arsenal of defenses. Windows has 3 core defense features. The first is UAC, user account control. When installing software, changing system settings, or even deleting important files, the system will pop up a dialog asking, "Do you want to allow this program to make changes to your computer?" That's UAC acting as the system's gatekeeper, strictly limiting programs from modifying system files, the registry, and other critical resources. Even if malware sneaks onto your computer and attempts to tamper with core system data, once it triggers a UAC prompt, it will be blocked unless you actively click Allow Often. It's precisely that simple dialog that stops most unauthorized malicious operations. The second is ASLR, Address Space Layout Randomization, a defense against memory exploits. Worms and viruses often rely on buffer overflow vulnerabilities and must know where important files or code are located in memory. ASLR solves this by randomizing the memory locations of important data each time the system boots. Code that used to be at an address like 0x123456 could be at 0x789ABC next time. This prevents attackers from predicting where to target. Even if they find a vulnerability, they can't reliably locate the right target in memory, so malicious code cannot readily take effect. The third is DEP, Data Execution Prevention, which is like labeling memory with permissions. The system divides memory into data regions and code regions. Data regions store user input like text and images, while code regions are where executable instructions live. DEP prohibits data regions from being executed as code. Even if malware injects its code into a data region via buffer overflow, DP will block it from running. This blocks classes of attacks that rely on turning data into executable code. macOS' defensive approach emphasizes source control and isolation. The first is Gatekeeper, which acts like an identity inspector for apps. Apps downloaded from the App Store are reviewed by Apple and carry trusted signatures. Third-party apps downloaded from the web also need developer signatures recognized by Apple to pass Gatekeeper checks. If you download an unsigned program, Gatekeeper will warn and block it by default, saying this app is from an unknown developer and can't be opened unless you manually change settings. Such a program simply won't run, effectively cutting off the source of malicious software. The second is Sandboxing. It's like giving each app its own isolated room. Each app is restricted to its sandbox and may only access its own cache files and configuration data. To access other system resources, it needs your explicit permission. For example, if you open a malicious web page that executes code inside your browser, that code is confined to the browser's sandbox and can't freely modify system files or steal data elsewhere. Sandboxing isolates apps from the system core so that even if an app is compromised, it won't bring down the whole system. Linux's defensive strengths lie in a strict permission model and fine-grained control. First, the permissions model. Linux clearly divides ordinary users and root, administrator. In daily use, you typically log in as a normal user whose permissions are limited. You can open your documents and run regular programs, but you can't directly modify core system directories like etc or bin directory. Even if malware infects your account, attempts to delete system files or change core settings will fail for lack of permission. Only root can operate on those critical resources, and obtaining root requires explicit authentication. Unless you grant it, malware cannot gain it on its own. Second, SELinux. security-enhanced Linux, or ASLR. These can define access rules for each process. For example, you can configure Firefox can only access the downloads folder and web data and cannot read desktop documents. Even if a process is hijacked and tries to break its bounds, SELinux or ASLR will immediately block it according to the preset policy. This fine-grained confinement means that even if malware enters the system, it can be tightly restricted and prevented from causing broad damage. Traditional antivirus software centers on signature detection, which is like assigning every known malware an ID number and scanning files to see if they match those IDs. The problem is that attackers create new malware every day. Their signatures are unknown to traditional antivirus, and attackers can pack or obfuscate malware to change its signature and evade detection. So relying on signature-based detection alone is far from sufficient to defend against novel attacks. To address these issues, modern security technologies have emerged. Behavioral detection. Normal programs act predictably. For example, document editors handle docs, music players play audio, while malware behaves abnormally. For example, a small utility suddenly traverses drives and encrypts files. It triggers alerts, blocks processes, or isolates suspicious software, intercepting even new malware via abnormal actions. Machine learning, trained on massive normal or malicious software datasets, code structures, behaviors, features, to identify malware patterns. It analyzes new software, judges maliciousness, predicts attacks, and improves with more samples. Zero trust security. Core idea is never trust, always verify. No default trust in corporate networks. Attackers often infiltrate via phishing or compromised devices. Every access request needs strict identity or permission checks. For example, employee home access requires password, phone verification, and device security checks, limiting attackers' lateral movement and data access. But remember, there is no perfect defense. Your security habits matter just as much. Keeping your system and software updated, not downloading cracked software, and being cautious about opening unknown email attachments. These simple practices can help you avoid most risks. If you want to learn more about computer science topics, remember to like and subscribe. See you next time.